knew I had been spending too much time at the Calloway house when I walked through the front door without knocking, set a 12-pack of sparkling water on the counter like I stocked their fridge on rotation, and Sandra Calloway said perfect timing without even turning around from the stove. I was there because Ivy had asked me to come early. Her older sister was getting married in 3 weeks and the engagement dinner was tonight, and apparently that meant I needed to be present at 6:30 to help arrange chairs, fold napkins in a way that didn't look like airport origami, and carry things from the garage. I had been folding napkins wrong since college. Ivy had been correcting me since we met 4 years ago in the break room at Hartwell Creative, where she had looked at the paper towel I was using as a plate and said, "That's not the flex you think it is." I told her I was being resourceful. She said I was being cheap. I told her resourcefulness and cheapness were morally equivalent. She looked at me for one long second and said, "I'm going to disagree with you about things for a long time, aren't I?" She was right. I just didn't understand yet what kind of right she was going to turn out to be. The Calloway house was in Raleigh, 40 minutes from my apartment, but I had made the drive often enough that my GPS stopped trying to give me alternate routes. Ivy's parents had lived there since she was 7. The driveway had a crack running diagonal near the basketball hoop. The side gate latched only if you pressed it flat before turning the handle, and the kitchen always smelled like whatever Sandra had started cooking 2 hours earlier. Tonight, it was something with garlic and rosemary and the kind of warmth that made the whole house feel like someone had already decided the evening was going to go well. Ivy was in the dining room when I walked in. She was crouching over a cardboard box, pulling out clusters of small white tea lights with the focus of someone diffusing something complicated. "You're here," she said without looking up. "You texted me 4 times. 3 times and 1 voice memo." The voice memo was a text. The voice memo had inflection. She held up 2 strands of lights, one longer than the other. "Which one do you think goes over the mantel?" I looked at both. They looked the same. "They are not the same. Then the longer one." She made a noise that suggested I had passed a test I didn't know I was taking. She stood up, handed me the box, and pointed toward the living room. "Start along the window ledge and I'll tell you when to stop." That was Ivy. Not exactly a command, not exactly a request. Something in between that assumed I was already moving. The annoying part was, I usually was. Her sister Dana was upstairs getting dressed. Her brother-in-law-to-be, Ryan, was sitting at the kitchen table looking mildly terrified, which Sandra was addressing by handing him tasks. I passed through once and he was peeling potatoes. The second time he was chopping parsley he clearly had no idea what to do with. He gave me a look that said help. I gave him a look that said no. Ivy's dad, Paul, was on the back porch with the grill and a beer and exactly 0 concerns about anything happening inside. I envied him on a structural level. By the time I had strung lights along 2 window ledges, Ivy had rearranged the dining table twice and explained to me that the napkins I had folded looked like gift shop swans that gave up. I refolded them. She adjusted the angle by 11 degrees. I asked if she was joking. She was not joking. "You have exactly 1 setting," I said. "Efficient." I was going to say intense. Those are the same thing. She turned to look at the table. "This looks good. Don't touch anything." "I'm not touching anything." "You're thinking about touching something." "I'm thinking about sitting down." She pulled a chair out and handed it to me. "Carry this to the corner. We need more space by the window." I carried the chair. This was also how it usually went with us. I had known Ivy for 4 years. Close friends for 3. The kind of close where I had a drawer at her apartment with phone chargers and a spare jacket, and she had a shelf in my fridge. I didn't question. The kind of close where she called me after bad days before she called anyone else, and I did the same. And we had both agreed out loud once that this was just because we were good at talking to each other, which was so obviously incomplete that neither of us pressed on it. The dinner guests started arriving at 7. Dana came downstairs in a green dress that made Sandra start crying immediately, which made Dana start crying, which made Ryan look at me like I was the only stable person in the building. I pointed at the parsley. He pointed at Dana. Fair. Ivy moved through the room the way she always did at family things, refilling glasses before people asked, steering conversations away from topics that had caused arguments at previous dinners. making everyone feel like they had been the most important person in the room. She had done this at my cousin's wedding last spring when she came as my +1. She had done it at my company holiday party when she showed up with homemade cookies, because I had mentioned offhand that the catered desserts were always sad. I watched her hand Dana a tissue without interrupting a sentence she was finishing with someone else. Two things at once, always. I had always admired that about her. I tried not to think about what else I admired about her, because that list had gotten long enough to be uncomfortable. Sandra touched my arm near the bookshelf. You found the parking okay? Same spot by the mailbox. She smiled like I had confirmed something. Good. You know, I used to have to remind Ivy to text people parking instructions. She never forgets with you. I didn't know what to say to that. I said something about the lights looking nice and excused myself toward the appetizers, which was cowardly but effective. Dinner was loud in the good way. 11 people at a table sized for 8, talking over each other about the wedding venue, about Dana and Ryan's apartment in Charlotte, about a family trip from 6 years ago that had apparently involved a rental car situation. Nobody was over. Ryan got a little quieter as the wine came out. Dana laughed at everything he said. I sat across from Ivy, which was either the best seat or the worst seat, depending on the hour. She stole a roasted potato off my plate without asking. That was mine, I said. You had 4. I had 3.5. You took it before I finished. You were clearly done with it emotionally. I looked at her. That is not how potatoes work. She ate it and looked entirely at peace. Sandra, from 2 seats down, watched this and said nothing. But I saw the small smile she pressed flat before turning back to Paul. At some point after dessert, when Dana and Ryan were in the kitchen rinsing dishes and most of the guests had drifted to the living room, Ivy and I ended up on the back porch. It wasn't planned. She had come out to check on the outdoor string lights that had blinked off earlier, and I'd followed because the conversation inside had turned to a home renovation topic I had nothing to contribute to. The porch was quiet. November in Raleigh meant the air had gotten sharp without being brutal, and the backyard was dark past the reach of the porch light. Ivy stood near the railing, checking the plug on the light strand, and I leaned on the post and watched her and tried to remember a version of this year that hadn't mostly been her. I couldn't find one. She fixed the plug. The strand of lights blinked back on over the yard, pale and warm, strung between 2 posts Paul had put up for a summer party 3 years ago and then never taken down. There, she said. Good save. It was a loose connection. She leaned on the railing beside me. Not close, exactly, but close enough that I could see the edge of her earrings catching the light. Do you think Dana and Ryan are going to be okay? I looked back through the glass door at where they were still in the kitchen. Ryan had stopped rinsing. Dana was showing him something on her phone and they were both laughing. Yeah, I said. I think they're going to be great. Ivy nodded slowly. She was nervous tonight. She doesn't show it, but she gets this thing where she laughs too fast. I didn't notice. I know. It's a sister thing. She was quiet for a second. I notice things like that, about people I care about. I did not say what I was thinking. I looked at the lights over the yard instead. Inside, the living room conversation had gotten louder. Someone was telling a story that required volume. The kitchen had gone quiet. Then the back door opened and Sandra stepped out. She had a dish towel in one hand and the pleasant expression of a woman who had arranged something. Here you both are, she said, like she had been mildly looking, not specifically looking. Lights were out, Ivy said. Oh, I know. Sandra glanced at the string lights with zero interest in the string lights. Then she looked at me, then at Ivy, then back at me. And she said it so simply it took me a second to process it. She had a drawer pulled out at my counter for 20 minutes last Tuesday. Did you know that? Just talking. About you. Not about anything particular, just you. The porch went still. Ivy turned to her mother with an expression I had never seen on her before. It was past annoyed. It was past embarrassed. It was the face of someone who had just heard their phone ring on silent in a quiet room. Mom, I'm just saying, you are not just saying anything. You are specifically saying something. Sandra folded the dish towel with great serenity. I'm telling our guest what I told your Aunt Helen last month, that you talk about this man like he's the weather, constantly, without noticing. I looked at the yard. I looked at the lights. I looked at the porch boards because they were the most neutral surface available. Okay, Ivy said, very quiet. That's enough. She worries when you skip lunch, Sandra continued, and I had to hand it to Sandra Calloway. She had the tone of someone sharing a recipe, not dismantling two people's careful infrastructure. She mentioned you have a habit of working through noon when you're on a deadline, and she keeps fruit cups in her desk for when you come by her office looking like you forgot what food was. I opened my mouth. Nothing useful came out. The fruit cups are a professional courtesy, Ivy said. You bought the ones with the mangoes because he mentioned once that he liked them. Silence. I had mentioned mango once. I was sure it was in passing. I was equally sure I hadn't expected it to be filed away and acted on, and apparently mentioned to Sandra Calloway as evidence. I'm gonna go help Dana, Ivy said. Dana is fine. Dana might need something. Ivy. But she had already gone through the back door with the controlled precision of someone who had decided the exit was more important than the argument. The door closed behind her, not a slam, just a close. Sandra and I stood on the porch for a moment. She's going to be upset with you, I said. Probably. Sandra didn't seem troubled by this. She'll be more upset if nothing comes of it. I didn't answer that. She handed me the dish towel for reasons I didn't understand. The study's at the end of the hall. That's where she goes when she needs a minute. She looked at me with the calm of a woman who had been watching two people lose ground slowly and had decided tonight was the night. You should give her about 4 minutes, then go. I stood on the porch alone with a dish towel and no good options. Inside, through the glass, I could see the living room. Paul laughing at something. Dana gesturing wide. Ryan learning, visibly, how to be part of a loud family and finding he liked it. I thought about what Sandra had said. Not the mango detail, though that was sitting somewhere in my chest, doing something I didn't have a word for. The part about talking about someone like they were the weather. Constantly. Without noticing. I had done that with Ivy. I was aware of this. I had said her name in conversations where she wasn't relevant. I had told my coworker about something Ivy had said about a restaurant, and he had looked at me and gone, "You talk about her a lot," and I had said we were close and changed the subject. I thought about last winter when she had called me at 11:30 on a Tuesday because she'd had a bad review at work and needed to talk, and I had sat on my couch for 2 hours listening, and it hadn't felt long. It had felt like the natural amount of time. I thought about her sitting at my kitchen table last April doing her taxes because her apartment's Wi-Fi was slow, and how normal that had been, how I had made coffee and she had complained about depreciation and I had not wanted her to leave and had not examined why. 4 minutes, Sandra had said. I went inside. The hallway was quiet. Coat hooks on one wall, a small table with mail on it, a framed photo of the Calloway family from what looked like the mid-2000s. Young Ivy with a gap in her teeth and a look that already suggested she would be very specific about napkin folding. The study door was half open. Ivy was standing at the window with her back to me, arms crossed, looking at the dark side yard. The room was small, just a desk, a bookshelf, an armchair with a throw on it, a lamp on low. It smelled like old paper and the candle Sandra kept on the corner of the desk. "I know you're there," she said. "Your mom sent me. I know that too." I stepped inside and left the door the way it was. "You okay?" "I'm fine." She said it the way people said fine when they meant the opposite and knew you knew it. It was nothing. She was being her. She mentioned the mango fruit cups. Ivy pressed her eyes shut for a half second. Those were on sale, the ones with mango in them specifically. Mango is a common flavor. I didn't push. I stood near the desk and looked at the bookshelf, which had a small succulent on it that Ivy had told me once her mom could not stop buying. There were 4 of them on the shelf, a 5th on the windowsill. "She wasn't trying to embarrass you," I said. "She succeeded anyway." "I know." Ivy turned from the window. Her arms were still crossed, but the expression had changed. Less defensive now, more tired, or maybe more honest. The room was small enough that I could see the way she was deciding something. "It's not that she said it," Ivy said. "It's that it's true, and she said it in front of you." I didn't try to deflect that. I stayed where I was and let it sit. "I talk about you," she said. "A lot, apparently." I didn't realize how much until she started listing things and I recognized every single one of them and couldn't argue about a single detail. She looked at the window. The lunch thing. I do think about that. You get this specific quiet when you haven't eaten and you think you're hiding it and you're not. I don't go quiet. You stop finishing your sentences. I thought about this. I couldn't disprove it. And the mango thing was not calculated, she said. I just remembered. And then I saw them at the store and they weren't even that much more than the regular ones. I know, I said. You don't have to look at me like that. Like what? Like you're figuring something out. I was figuring something out. I had been figuring it out since Sandra said the word constantly, and something in my chest had done a math I hadn't asked it to do. The truth was that I had known for a while, not consciously, not clearly, but in the background way that you sometimes know things before you're ready to know them. The drawer at her apartment. The way I described her to people, not as my friend, usually just as Ivy, like she needed no category. The way I still thought of things to tell her after we hung up and sent them as texts like a continuation of a conversation that never fully stopped. I had been calling it closeness. I had been calling it the best friendship I'd ever had. Both of those things were true. They were also not all of it. Ivy. She looked at me. I've been doing the same thing, I said. She didn't move. Not the fruit cups specifically, I said. But I tell people things about you. I say your name when you're not there. Last month, Tyler from work asked me about a coffee shop downtown, and I told him the one on Glenwood has better chairs and more outlets. And I only know that because we spent 3 hours there in March when you were editing that project and you mentioned the chairs were good. I stopped. I remember that. I remember a lot of things like that. Ivy's arms came down from where they were crossed. She put one hand on the desk behind her, steadying, not quite leaning. Why didn't you say anything, she said, and it wasn't quite a question. Because I was terrified of being wrong, and then I was terrified of being right, and then enough time passed that it felt easier to just not examine it. She looked at the lamp, then back at me. I had a moment, she said slowly. A specific one. Do you remember when your apartment flooded last February? I remembered. The pipe under the bathroom sink had gone, and I had called the plumber on a Sunday, and the whole thing had cost more than I wanted to think about. And Ivy had shown up with a bag from the Thai place on Wilmington Street and sat on my floor with me while I waited for the water to dry. You were so calm about it, she said. You weren't panicking. You were just dealing with it, making calls, moving the stuff from under the sink, already figuring out what you were going to tell the landlord. And I was sitting there watching you, and I had this thought. She stopped. What? I thought I would do this with him, whatever this is. The bad Sundays and the plumber calls and the Thai food on the floor. I would do that. The lamp hummed. Somewhere beyond the study door, the party continued without us. Quieter now, people starting to gather things and say goodbyes. Dana's laugh came through the wall, bright and certain. That was February, I said. I know. You didn't say anything. You didn't either. She wasn't wrong. I had thought about that Sunday a lot, actually. I had thought about how she hadn't needed to come and had come anyway, and how she'd made me eat before I finished calling the insurance line, and how when I walked her out to her car afterward, she had looked at me in the parking lot under the overhead light and said, "Don't stress about the money. It'll work out," with such specific confidence that I had believed her before I'd had a reason to. I had thought about it and called it friendship and gone to sleep. I'm sorry it took Sandra embarrassing both of us on a Tuesday in November, I said. Ivy's mouth moved. Almost a smile. Wednesday. Wednesday, I'm sorry it took a Wednesday. It's a very on-brand way for it to happen, honestly. Is it? You need a push. She wasn't saying it mean. She was saying it true. You always have. You're thoughtful to the point of paralysis. That's a kind way to say I stall. It's an accurate way. She looked at me steadily. I'm not a staller. I go quiet instead, which is different and also annoying. It is a little annoying. I know. I pushed off from the desk and took one step toward her. She didn't step back. She watched me with the same expression she got when she was waiting for me to finish a thought she already knew the shape of. I should have said this before now, I said. I've thought about it. I've thought about you, in the way that's more than what I've been calling it. Ivy's chin tilted up just slightly. What have you been calling it? Friendship. Closeness. Good timing. I shook my head. None of those are wrong exactly. They're just smaller than the actual thing. She was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that had weight in it. I used to think, she said, that if I said it and you didn't feel the same way, I'd lose you. And losing you sounded like losing the thing I counted on most. So I didn't. I thought the same thing, I said. Probably for longer than I want to admit. How long? A while. I looked at her. Long enough that I got comfortable with it being unnamed and then couldn't remember why that felt safer. She let out a breath. That's remarkably unhelpful in retrospect. Genuinely. We could have saved a lot of Wednesday evenings. We could have, I said, but we also had a lot of good Wednesday evenings. Something shifted in her face at that. The last piece of the gardeness, the part she kept up even when the rest came down, it went quiet. Yeah, she said softly. We did. I was close enough that the small succulent on the desk was somewhere in my peripheral vision and the lamp was casting everything warm and low. I had thought about this in the vague way you thought about things you told yourself were hypothetical. I had thought about what it would feel like to not have to talk around it anymore. It felt, standing in her parents' study with a dish towel I'd forgotten I was holding now, sitting on the desk behind me, like something I should have stopped talking around a long time ago. I'm not going to be weird about it, I said. You're already being a little weird about it. I'm being genuine. Those can coexist. I smiled. She smiled. And then the space between us was less than it had been, and her hand came up and rested on the front of my jacket, not pulling. Just there. Like she wanted the confirmation that I was actually standing in front of her and not something she'd reasoned herself into. I kissed her. There was no noise behind it. The party on the other side of the wall, the lamp, the 5 succulents, none of it got dramatic. It just felt correct, the way a sentence feels when the last word finally lands. Her hand stayed on my jacket. My hand found the edge of the desk behind her and I rested it there. Careful, and neither of us moved away when it ended. She looked at me. Your mom is going to be completely insufferable about this, she said. Your mom started this. My mom is going to consider this a victory. She should. She won. Ivy pressed her lips together, not quite suppressing the smile. I can't go back out there. We have to go back out there. Give me a reason. Dana's going to notice you're gone. Dana is 22 days from her own wedding and thinking about literally nothing else. Your dad will notice. My dad noticed nothing all evening. Sandra will come back if we don't. That landed. Ivy looked at the door. Fair point. She straightened up and smoothed her shirt, which didn't need smoothing, and looked at me once more like she was confirming something. Okay, she said. We went back through the hallway. The living room had thinned out. Dana's friend from college was saying goodbye near the door. Paul was putting on a record, something low and old, the kind of music he put on when the evening had reached the stage he liked best. Sandra was in the kitchen. She looked up when we came in. She didn't say anything. She just looked at us for a moment with an expression that was almost restrained, then turned back to the counter and said, There's leftover rosemary chicken if either of you want to take some home. Ivy pointed at her. Don't. I'm offering food. You're being smug. I'm being hospitable. Sandra reached for the container. Chad, do you want the bigger portion or should I split it? I opened my mouth. Ivy said, He wants the bigger one. He always skips breakfast. Sandra looked at her. Ivy looked at the window. I looked at the ceiling. Paul walked past to get something from the refrigerator and paused. He looked at me, then at Ivy, then at the record player like it owed him an explanation. Then he got his thing from the fridge and went back to the living room. Finally, he said, under his breath, on his way out. Dana appeared in the doorway a moment later. She looked at us, looked at Sandra, looked at the rosemary chicken. Did something happen? Nothing, Ivy said. Dana studied us for exactly 4 seconds. Then she pointed at me. Okay, welcome to the family, I guess. She turned and went back to Ryan. Ivy sat down at the kitchen table and put both hands flat on it and stared at the surface. I sat beside her. Your entire family has been waiting for this, I said. My entire family has no sense of boundaries. Your entire family loves you. She looked at me sideways. You're allowed to think that's annoying. I think it's great, I said. I might need a few weeks to feel comfortable, but I think it's great. She stole a piece of chicken directly from the container Sandra was wrapping. That was mine, Sandra said. You were going to give him the bigger portion. I was being generous. I live here. You haven't lived here in 7 years, Ivy. I laughed, quiet, into my hand, and Ivy kicked me under the table, and Sandra smiled at the counter. And from the living room, Paul's record played something slow and unhurried, and Dana called out something to Ryan that made him answer back immediately, and the kitchen smelled like rosemary and the end of a long evening that had gone exactly right. 3 months later, I was back at the Calloway house for Easter. Same driveway crack, same side gate that needed lifting before turning. The difference was Ivy meeting me at the door before I knocked, already mid-sentence about something her aunt had said in the family group chat, like the conversation had started an hour ago and I was just catching up. Sandra passed through the living room at some point and handed me an Easter basket that had a small mango fruit cup in it. Ivy said, Mom. Sandra said, seasonal. I looked at the fruit cup. I looked at Ivy. She pointed at me. Don't say a word. I didn't say a word. I just put the fruit cup in my jacket pocket and followed her into the kitchen, where the rest of the afternoon was already waiting, loud and warm, right where it had always been.